It was a disaster unlike anything Japan had seen before. A magnitude 7.9 earthquake violently shook eastern Japan. The country's two largest cities, Tokyo and Yokohama, would soon lie in ruins after fires that burned for days destroyed huge sections of the crowded cities.
Tokyo was a disaster waiting to happen, and the fires just whipped through this wooden city.
40% of the urban landscape of Tokyo was burned to ash, and 90% of Yokohama was burned. That's an extraordinary figure.
Today, 100 years later, the Great Kanto Earthquake remains the deadliest natural disaster in modern Japanese history.
The most accurate estimate puts the death toll around 105,000 people, and nearly 92,000 of those died because of fire. To describe the Great Kanto Earthquake as one of the great tragedies of the 20th century would not be an exaggeration.
It also marked a turning point in how Japan, one of the most seismically active nations on Earth, prepares for inevitable disaster. It's easy to forget that Tokyo didn't always look like this. Today, the sprawling city is a sea of concrete and steel. But 100 years ago, Tokyo was a far different place.
So let me just paint you a bit of a picture of what Tokyo looked like in 1923. If you were a visitor and you arrived in Tokyo Station, you'd be impressed by the brick buildings and the reinforced concrete structures. But if you were to step outside of central Tokyo into some of the outlying wards, you would be overwhelmed by the fact that Tokyo was primarily a wooden city.
Janet Borland is a historian at the International Christian University in Tokyo and the author of Earthquake Children, Building Resilience from the Ruins of Tokyo. She has extensively studied the impact of the 1923 disaster and how it shaped the Japanese government's approach to city planning. Tokyo in 1923 was going through a period of rapid growth.
If you had to describe Tokyo on the eve of the earthquake, you'd call it a burgeoning imperial capital. It was the political and economic center of not only Japan, but the Japanese Empire.
Charles Schenking is a historian at the University of Hong Kong and the author of The Great Kanto Earthquake and the Chimera of National Reconstruction in Japan.
The population of Tokyo had virtually doubled from about 1.12 million people in 1900 to about 2.5 million people by 1920.
While the era saw the rise of modern architecture, across the Sumida River, a different kind of growth was underway.
Now, these wards are typically referred to as the shitamachi, the low-lying districts of Tokyo. And this is where, if we look at the wards east of the Sumida River, such as Honjo and Fukagawa, this is where a lot of the poorest people of Tokyo live, and they were densely crowded.
The tightly packed wooden structures were at risk of becoming a dangerous tinderbox if disaster struck.
It was the most powerful earthquake to hit Tokyo in over 200 years. Honjo became kind of the epicenter of death.
The devastation in Tokyo and Yokohama was unprecedented.
I mean, on a real visceral human level, it was a disaster that confronted all senses. The writer Tanaka Kotaro described the sound he heard when the first tremor struck. And a lot of people talked about the sound. It was as if a giant blackening whirlwind deep from underground had been unleashed upon Tokyo. The most harrowing part of the catastrophe was about to begin. It was triggered by fire. And virtually all of these large fires burned until there was nothing left to burn, leading one anonymous chronicler to write, "If this were not hell, where would hell be?" Another aspect of this tragedy was the spread of wild rumors and the breakdown of order and the killing of innocent people following the earthquake. We know that between 6,000 and 8,000 Koreans were murdered. Racism, hatred, resentment, fear, criminal opportunism all contributed to this tragedy.
So the lessons from 1923 convinced experts that they needed to better prepare society for future disasters. If you were to take a bird's eye view of Tokyo today, if you were observing Tokyo from the top of the Skytree Tower in Ueno or looking out over the city, you would be overwhelmed and struck by the sea of concrete basically before you. And this is really a legacy of past disasters and earthquakes.
Japan would continue to be hit with large earthquakes, but even at their most disastrous, the death toll never reached the tragic heights of the 1923 quake. Experts say a major reason is that standards since then have steadily improved.
Today, Japan is well recognized as one of the nations best prepared to face seismic risk.
Japan instituted its first earthquake-specific building codes in 1924 as Tokyo and Yokohama built back from the ruins. These building codes were regularly revised, eventually becoming some of the most strict seismic standards in the world.
Due to the Great Kanto Earthquake, because some buildings survived because they are designed against earthquake, then the central government officers observed the situation in the Kanto area. Then they recognized seismic design code is quite important and required in the Tokyo city.
Today, Japanese buildings that adhere to the highest standards employ innovative features that dampen vibrations and reduce dangerous side-to-side movement of tall buildings. This 247-meter skyscraper was built with shock absorbers that dampen the effects of tremors.
で3つの種類の制振装置が使われてまして、今ここで見ていただいたようなオイルダンパーが全部で220機で、もう一つですね、壁状の制振装置があるんですけども、それが120機で、さらにブレーキダンパーと呼ばれているような種類の制振装置が全部404機、この3種類を使っています。ここにはオイルダンパーっていうのが置いてありますけども、これ筒の中にですね油が入ってるんですね。で本物はもっと大きくてですね人が抱えられないぐらいの大きさがあるんですけども、これが地震の時にこう伸びたり縮んだりっていうことを繰り返す。そうすると何が起こるかというとですね、やがてこれが暖かくなってきます。つまり振動のですね揺れのエネルギーを熱のエネルギーに変換して消費する。で結果として建物の揺れを抑えると。
Other skyscrapers now feature large pendulums that counterbalance side-to-side movement during a quake. Others are built on foundations of rubber and steel that help absorb motion before it damages a building.
Current techniques against the earthquake, the more advanced seismic design way. Like a car, if you hit a car, your car will crash. Then you cannot use anymore, but you survive. Because the cars are designed so that the collision energy will be dissipated. That's quite similar. The buildings are also designed to suffer the damage safely.
In Tokyo, more than 90% of the homes are now earthquake resistant, and the city itself is better insulated against large fires since the percentage of wooden homes and buildings in the city shrinks every year. Still, some older neighborhoods, like those in the Arakawa ward, still contain many wooden buildings.
古い住宅がですね、なかなか更新されない、建て替わらないという状況があって、区内の約6割がもうその木造住宅密集地域と呼ばれる現状になってしまっておりますので、そういったところをまず改善していくための対策というところを今重点的に行っているところでございます。
The wooden material is quite common in Japan. The fire accident is a quite big concern. If you look at the downtown area in Tokyo, they still have the quite similar city plan as Edo period. So we needed to change the city planning to prevent the fire accident well in advance to the next earthquake.
Local officials are working to slowly replace the older fire-prone structures with safer, modern ones. Together, these are measures that save lives. The Tokyo government found that when it's hit with another earthquake on the same scale as the Great Kanto Earthquake, the death toll could be as high as 6,200. Still a serious tragedy, but far less than the more than 100,000 who lost their lives in 1923.
I think if we look at some of the lessons or takeaways from the Great Kanto Earthquake for today, I would say one is that if you live in a region that has a high level of seismic risk, do everything possible now to be prepared for the future.